All right. Well, we'll just give everybody a few minutes to file in, seeing the attendees list growing as we speak.
Feels so strange already because I'm so used to the podcast on these guys.
Yeah, this will be a nice change of pace.
Yeah, well, that or we're gonna have to like make this a new thing for the podcast, and now it'll be a vodcast that we also release as audio only.
In today's vlog.
Right? Yes, exactly.
The vlog.
I'll
Whereas like Natalie's at live from Milwaukee.
Yeah.
and everywhere else that we are.
And we can say live from headquarters.
Mm-hmm. Then we'd all have to get like backgrounds from Inside Out.
Oh God.
All the globes, everything.
Thinking more like Saturday Night Live or something like that back in the original days.
Oh yeah. Live from Milwaukee. It's Thursday afternoon.
It's sunny and cold.
Totally awesome.
All right. Keep an eye on my time. I will wait one more minute and then we will kick it off.
Zach, did you get any of the snow over there?
A little bit.
Called up Rick. He had like 4 inches in Houston.
We got like last week we got maybe like 2-3 inches. This week it's just been cold, just really cold.
Yeah,
That's
the same
at least by Nashville standards.
What's the
They
temperature?
stay on snow plows, right?
Yeah, yeah. Strangely enough, I don't think this place knows how to snowplow. Like they don't. They come in and they kind of like it's growing up in Minnesota. It's completely different how they do it. Like they they'll go in, they'll plow, they'll lay salt on the back. And these guys they'll come in, they'll plow, they'll have to plow it again, plow it one more time, and then like there's still like a layer of snow, and then like they don't salt. But then like the next day they'll realize they need to salt, so they'll come back and they'll put salt down. It's just they're they're still trying to figure it out.
It's like, what is this stuff? You come to the Midwest,
yeah, exactly.
Right all down. They got the grinder on the edge, throwing
Yeah.
sparks off and stuff.
My sister-in-law's down in the Panhandle, and they're getting like 4 inches of snow, and the whole place is just shut down. Like they're treating it like a hurricane. The whole thing is just shut down. They don't know what to do.
What is this stuff? Right.
I was on a call yesterday with some internal Rockwell people, and they asked me like if my kids were getting snow days. Just like, I don't think we've had a snow day here like ever since I was a kid.
That's right. You're Canada, so it's just like that.
Like the movie Snow Day was filmed here.
Yeah.
But it's not the same thing. Okay, let's kick this off. There's still people trickling in, but I think we have enough to get started. So let's get going. So, welcome everyone. Thank you for attending today. This is my first webinar doing this, and I don't know, Zach, I get the sense you might have been on a webinar before.
I did last month's.
Okay. And
2 months?
Natalie,
Yeah.
probably the same for you?
Yeah, I did one back in August of last year. So hello to everyone again.
Nice. Cool. And Tyler, have you ever been on one of these?
I think this is probably my net new for Rockwell out here, but
No.
other experiences out there in the net citizenship out there.
Awesome. So yeah, my first one, and The topic is, it's funny enough because it kind of came out of the podcast episode that we all did together at the end of last year, which was, just some predictions, what we thought might be happening in the realm of OT cybersecurity in 2025, where we thought things were going to go. And so they invited us back to do this webinar on our predictions again, OT cybersecurity trends and predictions for 2025. So welcome all of you. Thanks for attending. If anybody is having any problems at all with hearing, or like if you can't see the slideshow that I'm sharing right now, please just drop a message in chat and I will attempt to remediate that on the fly. But in the meantime, I think we are going to move along. So we kind of did introductions already, but just to quickly go over things again. My name is Kenneth Cooley. I am the System Support Lead for Verve Industrial. And then we also have Natalie Kalinowski, Cyber Technical Consultant from Rockwell Automation, Tyler Bergman, Cybersecurity Operations Manager from Verve Industrial, and also Zachary Wolcher, one of our cyber data analysts, works for the customer success department here at Verve. Between the four of us, you can see on the sidebar, a few decades of experience cumulatively working on the reliability, security of industrial control environments. Some of us have experience also going back to the actual operations side of things, SCADA development and the like. A wealth of expertise with the Verve product, especially in Tyler and Zach. And then also OT systems management, integration of different tools. And if you hadn't heard, of course, Verve was acquired by Rockwell a little over a year ago. It says 2023, and I should have caught that before because I think it was actually 2022. And then the integration kind of just wrapped up within the last month here. So that's the four of us. And in the absence of any urgent messages from people who can't see the screen, I think we should just dive right into topic.
All right, so hello everyone, I'll take the lead for now. So to kick off 2025, we wanted to start the first 10 minutes of the call kind of covering the topic of governance, compliance, and regulations, things that are either going to take effect this year or things that should be on your radar. So first up, we're looking at NIS 2, which is an EU-wide legislation on cybersecurity, basically to boost the overall level of security in the European Union. Now, of course, this is going to affect all locations located within the European Union. But if you have an enterprise with multiple locations outside of the EU, you might also have to consider NIS 2 if you're connected to locations that are within that geography. So what that means is NIS 2 can still apply to you. And it's always just good to keep an eye on these regulations that are starting out in the EU, which will eventually trickle out to other places around the world as typical. So for some background, this is the first time you're hearing of NIS 2, it's a directive that was originally published January 16th of 2023, so that each EU nation could take a look at these cybersecurity standards and best practices, and then transpose it into their own national laws. So then each EU nation had to take the NIS 2 directive and transpose it by October 17th of 2024. So that was this past fall. So all these nations made a plan to enforce and put this into their laws. And on this slide, you see that link there. So later on, if you're curious, if you follow that hyperlink, it'll take you to each nation's transposition of NIS 2, which I highly recommend checking out just because it's kind of interesting. And if you're curious to learn about how each EU nation is treating their cybersecurity, it's a good thing to just check out. But some of the requirements that that NIS 2 covers are, requiring member states to have a computer security incident response team. And then following this, they'll have to require you to be a part of the cooperation group. So the cooperation group is basically so that each of these EU nations can work together, facilitate communication in the event of any type of critical vulnerability or exploit that happens in one of these member states. And then there's a bunch of regulations on how quickly they have to report this information so that everyone can be aware of it. And so that's kind of some background on the NIST 2 and what you should look forward to this year now that it's all been transposed into each nation's law. So now it's going to start getting enforced. And so with that, we can go to the next slide. All right, so next up, we're covering NERC-CIP, which for those of you who are unfamiliar, NERC stands for the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, and then CIP stands for Critical Infrastructure Protection. So NERC-CIP, if you combine the two, it's a set of mandatory cybersecurity standards for entities that operate the bulk power system in North America. So this includes the US, Canada, and Mexico. Essentially, these standards were put into place to safeguard the electric grid from cyber attacks and other threats that can cause power outages. And so some background to NERC-CIP is, so in the 90s and early 2000s, there was a lot of concern about the reliability of the electric grid. And then in 2003, for those of you who may remember, there was this Northeast blackout where it was a huge major power outage that affected millions of people. And that's kind of what highlighted the need for an improved and enforced electric grid security. So following that 2003 Northeast blackout, NERC was created, and then it was given a facility because it was now going to be enforced by FERC, which FERC is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So then going on with this history lesson, so then in 2008, the first CIP standards were approved, and over the years, they've been evolving into what we now know as NERC-CIP. So for 2025, now that we kind of know where NERC-CIP came from, some things to look forward to with NERC-CIP is enhanced cybersecurity monitoring. So there's going to be things like CIP 015-1, which is a standard that's being modified to essentially strengthen internal network security monitoring. Another thing that you're going to look forward to is the mitigation of extreme weather impacts on the grid. We were joking around at the beginning of this call about, snowy weather. And I don't know where you're located, but if you're in the Gulf of Mexico area, Florida, you guys experience snow. So there's a lot more extreme weather events that are happening. And so now NERC-CIP is going to be integrating that into their standards to make sure that the electric grid is prepared for these extreme weather events and that they're resilient in the case of any of these events happening again in the future, which is something that we can probably predict is going to be happening again, unfortunately. And that is everything on NERC-CIP. So we're going to move on to the next topic, which is CIR-CIA. So next up, this is in the US. So I'll mention that CIR-CIA stands for Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act. And what it is it's a US federal law that aims to improve the cybersecurity of critical infrastructure by requiring entities to report cybersecurity incidents. It's kind of mimicking what the EU is doing with NIST 2, but now it's just going to be applied to the US. So as some background, one of the significant factors of this act coming into place was the SolarWinds attack that happened a few years ago. Essentially, some malicious code was inserted into the software update, and then it exposed a significant vulnerability in critical infrastructure supply chains. And that's what ended up creating the push to create this CIR-CIA Act in the US. So some of the major things you have to pay attention to coming up on 2025, if you're one of the entities that this is going to apply to, you'll have to do things like have 72 hours to report substantial cyber incidents when you have reasonable belief that an incident has occurred. There's another one also for ransomware. So you'll have 24 hours to report ransomware payments to CISA after something you've identified and have reasonable belief that a ransomware attack has occurred. So the goal behind this, the push behind this, is it's going to empower CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. So if you ever heard of CISA alerts, that's what we're talking about. We want to empower that agency to be able to collect and analyze incident data, to empower them to identify and address emerging threats, to share information with other government agencies, and then finally to provide support to the impacted entities. So for 2025, the thing to look forward to is that currently the CIR-CIA Act is currently in its draft and comment period, and then in October of this year, CISA will issue their final stance on it. So this will be something that will most likely start to be enforced in 2026. So this year is still a year of review, commenting, and then we'll see this happening more in 2026. So that's everything about CIR-CIA. All right, moving on to the next piece of compliance and regulation. This time we're looking at Canada, and there's two North two noteworthy standards to mention. First, we have CPCSC, which is the Canadian Program for Cybersecurity Certification. It's a fairly new cybersecurity program being developed by the Canadian government. So there's not a ton of guidance out there so far from what we know. It's currently only going to be enforced for any supplier who wants to work with the Canadian government, in which case you'll have to achieve a level 1, 2, or 3 level of security before you can bid or work on projects, especially relating to any type of operations, critical infrastructure, or defense contracts. This will most likely be rolled out to other sectors in more critical infrastructure, manufacturing facilities, etc. But for now in 2025, this is only going to be your concern if you're planning on working with a government entity. And then second, we have ITSG 33, which more of you may be more familiar with this. It's a compliance and best practices framework that isn't necessarily enforceable as it's not a legally binding regulation, but it is turned into an industry standard. So it's going to serve as a framework for internal security for many departments and agencies that are funded by the government. And it's just like highly recommended because then you can build trust with customers by showing that you're complying with this standard ITSG 33. The last thing on this topic for Canada, I've also added the Canada National Cyber Threat Assessment for 2025 and 2026. So what that means is it's a good read to give you an idea of what to expect in 2025 when it comes to state adversaries, cybercrime threats, and any trends that are specifically shaping Canada's cyber landscape. So with that, that's everything I have on this one. All right. So the next standard here is IEC 62443. It's an international standard that hopefully you've come across at this point. IEC stands for International Electrotechnical Commission, and it provides standards for securing industrial automation and control systems. I'll also note that this is a standard that's achieved through voluntary adoption by organizations, but at this point, it's almost a requirement to compete in the market and in the industry because it's basically become an industry-driven standard. Some background on IEC. So it came around because IEC and the International Society of Automation, or ISA, they recognized the need for cybersecurity standards because they realized there was a growing interconnectedness of industrial systems compounded with the increasing sophistication of these cyber threats over the years. And so what we're seeing now is, now that we've seen IEC 62443 develop, we're seeing that customers are now demanding that their suppliers adhere to these standards and principles to ensure the security of their own operations, even from like a third-party risk point of view, which we'll get into a little later. So for some more background, IEC 62443 covers a wide range of security topics like risk assessment, security policies, network security, access control, incident response, product security, etc. So if you've ever jumped on a Verve demo to learn about our platform, you'll hear us mention IEC 62443, and we'll mention it not only from the point of view of an organization, but also from a device level. So for example, if you're looking to set up a cybersecurity program in your facilities, this is probably the first standard I'd point you to get an idea of what you need to do as an organization and what you need to do to have products and devices that are secure by design. So if you've heard of the phrase secure by design, it's another useful proactive approach that essentially tells you and has you build your products to be designed to protect consumers from cyber threats. So finally, the last thing I'll mention here. So what do you have to look forward to in 2025 with IEC 62443? Well, beyond what's been established, the biggest things coming up are incorporating emerging technologies. So this includes new technologies like the Industrial Internet of Things, so IIoT, AI, and machine learning. So since these are all, kind of newer technologies, especially for the OT environment, they're still under review, so you probably won't see many new standards in 2025 yet. Most of them will still be in that draft and review process, but it's something to look forward to for 2026 when they get past that draft and review process. And then that leads me to the last slide I'll be talking about, which I just wanted to kind of show you guys an idea. So with IEC 62443 and all these other standards, I just wanted to show an example what Verve and Rockwell Automation are doing around this conversation of standards and compliance. Like I said, a lot of these are turning into industry standards. So customers are asking for it, and therefore we're already building it this way, but then it's also building trust with our customers. So as a company, we're adhering to all these standards for many reasons. So First and foremost, we want to protect ourselves and our customers, so it makes sense for us to comply with all these regulations. Second, we want to establish that as an organization, we provide secure solutions, products, and services. And then lastly, from us as an organization, we also want to show that we're also taking our own advice and implementing all these in our own enterprises and facilities, since Rockwell has many manufacturing facilities, and we comply with these frameworks to keep ourselves safe and secure. And so with that, I'll finish the conversation on governance and compliance and hand it over to Zach to bring up one cyber threat prediction we foresee in 2025.
Actually, just before that,
Mhm.
a housekeeping note, because I do see a couple of raised hands from the attendees. So if everybody could please avail themselves of the chat. If there are any questions that you have that you would like us to address when we have time for Q&A towards the end of the presentation, please just drop them in chat. Craig, Robert, I see you do have your hands up, and now someone else as well. So again, please do just drop a message into chat, and we will try and get to those in order at the end of the presentation. And on that note, Zach, all you.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So one of the items that we wanted to cover in today's webinar was something that was brought up in our podcast last month in a prediction towards cyber attacks in water. We've seen historical cyber attacks on energy. We've seen it on different critical infrastructure elements. There's big targets there. And so one of the areas that we really talked about during our podcast was the water industry and the need for mandatory compliance through law that requires the water industry to get up to par, similar to how we have with NERC CIP. So one of the big things that I want to cover is that the water sector is a major target for ransomware attacks. So historical ransomware attacks have been on customer data. So as citizens who have water going into your house, it's a basic necessity. This is something that just having your customer data there, it's maybe not as looked at or as protected as it would be in other IT departments or in other companies, simply because they are trying to provide you the service of water. So a lot of customer data has been hacked in previous ransomware attacks. There was an attack in 2020 that was mentioned in our podcast in Florida, where a cyber attack occurred at a city municipal water plant, and they were able to change the sodium hydroxide level. Thankfully, there was a supervisor that was there that caught it immediately as it happened and was able to revert the changes, showing a further precedence of this for the water sector. In the past year alone, there was 11 separate cyber attacks on the water and wastewater facilities, one of which was actually on American Water, which is the largest U.S. water treatment company in the United States, servicing 14 million different people. That was attacked in October, and it resulted in a 1-week outage. And again, this was a target mostly on the billing and customer accounts, but it shows a further attack surface area that they could get into and potentially impact water, both in chemicals and producing it as a service. The other ones that I wanted to mention was the Arkansas City Water Treatment Facility. So that was attacked in September, and they actually had to change all things from automated controls down to manual operations. So they had to call people in and in order to continue to provide water. And there was a series of Texas cities, Hale Center, Muleshoe, Lockney, and Abernathy, that were they were attacked in a series of cyber attacks. And all of those impacted varying different degrees of IT and OT operations. Next slide.
Should be there.
Oh, yep, there it is. Okay. So kind of showing that there is this precedence of attacks. We wanted to shift that gear now that we can see the history of attacks. We want to actually start looking towards this upcoming year and what needs to happen and what needs to change in order for these attacks to become less frequent and to better protect the water sector as well as the customer data that water has. So first and foremost, kind of adding on to Natalie's building scheme here of the history lesson. So in the United States, water is one of the 16 critical infrastructure sectors, but Right now, as it stands with so many cyber attacks, all it currently has is recommendations for cyber sanitization. So essentially, it has recommendations of, hey, get your assessments, know your vulnerabilities, know your assets. All of these are just recommendations. There's no federal requirements in the United States when it comes to compliance. And by doing so, there's no sort of fire to force the water sector into being compliant and to actually protecting their infrastructure. In Canada, which where the awesome Ken lives, they recognize water as a critical infrastructure item, but there is no actual regulatory compliance either. Again, they understand that it needs to be protected, but there's nothing to actually to force those changes. Right now, it's just simple recommendations. And unfortunately, as we see so often in the OT world, unless there's any sort of compliance, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So this is one of those areas that it's you don't know it's broken until somebody is hacked in, and you either have different chemical issues, or you're having water providing water services issues, or you're getting hit with a ransomware attack where they're holding customer data hostage. So in lieu of that, with Canada, so Canada does have a law that's currently in reading, the Critical Cyber Systems Protection Act. So currently it is still in the House of Commons for Canada. And what it would do is, so it's a dual part, but specifically on the operational side of the act, it would establish a regulatory framework which would strengthen the baseline cybersecurity in all of Canada's critical infrastructure. There's nothing that specifically aims towards the water sector, but it does highlight a need and requirements for the overall operational technology, ICS critical infrastructure that Canada has. Going back to the United States, so the EPA has previously utilized their existing authorities. So EPA has legal authority over all water in the United States. And the one thing that they were using previously over the last 2 years or so is that they're using their current authorities of doing sanitary checks. So they need to go in, they need to check the sanitary levels, make sure that the water is actually drinkable and good. They've been using these sort of checks to add cybersecurity regulations, which came under very heavy scrutiny, including the EPA getting sued by multiple states because they're kind of adding this item to things that aren't necessarily specifically towards cybersecurity. Not only that, but you have experts in water testing, so essentially chemists that are going into these places and giving cybersecurity requirements that they may not be able to fully grasp or to be able to verify without an actual SME on site. So the result of it was that the EPA dropped these existing authorities and instead gave a massive list of current resources that is out there right now. So part of the post-COVID world, as we saw drastic increases in ransomware across the OT infrastructures and critical infrastructure as a whole, the EPA offers these free resources. So they're offering free vulnerability scanning, they're offering free assessments, free training. They're giving a site where you can report any sort of cyber incident that you're having as a water sector provider. And of course, there is federal funding as well to kind of get your cybersecurity platform more mature and to build up those industries, especially considering that a lot of water is owned by cities or is owned by counties. So that's one of the good things that was provided with the EPA and in coordination with CISA. Right now, there is two associations. So the American Water Works Association and the National Rural Water Association, they're calling for a regulatory model. Now, what this would hopefully do, and we're hoping to see a lot more movement on it this year, is that it would require the water sector to have a NERC-CIP sort of regulatory compliance that could result in fines if it's not met to a certain maturity level for baseline or different tiers of water providers. So right now they are working with the EPA to create that sort of cybersecurity oversight and to create a auditing authority for the EPA so that they can go in, they can collaborate with the water industry, they can set certain requirements that the water industry has to meet in order to be compliant. And so that right now is one of the big areas that we are seeing as current development, both in the United States and in Canada. Right now, as we kind of mentioned in our podcast, the hope is that there isn't a massive water sector cyber attack that kind of forces legislation into this direction. We're hoping that legislation, U.S.'s Congress and and Canada's government as well, to work with the water sector, water industry, and to create these regulations on their own before some sort of major cyber attack happens, especially with the different state of the worlds that's going on currently. And so without any further ado, I will hand off to Ken.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Zach. So, and yes, a couple of interesting questions coming in. So look forward to trying to address some of those at the end of the seminar. But for now, third-party risk. So it's been interesting growing up immersed in technology and seeing just how things change. In particular, seeing the shift from, trying to do everything locally on box, locally on premise, to having critical dependence on the cloud and on bringing in outside expertise and bringing in outside integrations to perform particular tasks. In a way, it doesn't really surprise because it's a little bit difficult to expect every company in every industry to have all of the necessary expertise and capability to do all of the things that they need to do to produce the product that they're producing and also comply with any regulations that pertain to that and keep themselves safe and stay within budget and all of that stuff. So it's not really surprising that over time, and especially as, internet speeds have crept up, storage has gotten so cheap that we're seeing a lot more use of third-party software, hardware, integrations, cloud, all the rest. And one of the things that we talked about in the podcast was that third-party risk was probably going to be a big deal in 2025. And it certainly was in 2024. We saw a bunch of different cybersecurity events tied to third-party integrators, whether this was using cloud-based databases, whether this was managed services providers getting hacked, and then from there, the attackers were able to pivot into their clients. A very short and incomplete list includes, Fidelity Investments, Avis Budget Group, Amazon, Star Health Insurance, Slim CD, Ticketmaster, Change Healthcare, Toyota. It kind of hits across a number of different industry verticals, number of different businesses. And a lot of these were data breaches. The ultimate goal was to exfiltrate customer information, personal information, including sensitive stuff, driver's license numbers, personal health data, financials. Oftentimes, ransomware was a part of that as well, still very prevalent as a threat, used alongside data exfiltration to ratchet up the pressure on the targets, because if they can't, on the one hand, they can't get their data back, and on the other hand, somebody actually does have their data and is threatening to expose it if they don't pay up. So a really rock and a hard place situation for the victims of these attacks. And because it has proven so lucrative for the attackers, it stands to reason that this is not going to be a problem that is going to be less in 2025. Managing third-party risk then is going to be a significant component, or should be a significant component, of how operators across many different industry verticals manage risk. And there's a few different ways that this should be gone about. There's a few different ways to approach this. Some of it is on the third parties themselves, and companies who are using third-party vendors of any sort can enforce some of this contractually. Stipulations for due diligence in terms of, secure development practices, regular security audits, aligning with any relevant cybersecurity standards, many of which Natalie discussed at the outset of this seminar, and also stipulating breach reporting in the contracts as well, because if one of your providers gets compromised and puts you at risk of compromise as a result, obviously you want them to tell you, and you want them to tell you in a very timely fashion. And again, some of the regulations stipulate particular timelines for reporting, but in negotiating contracts with your third-party providers, it probably isn't a bad idea to put some of those same time limits in there as well, because you will want to know if there is a potential for any sort of security risk to you resulting from a security compromise in them. And when you have a third-party solution deployed, there's also things that you can do in-house to keep an eye on the situation. One of the big things, and again, we talked a little bit about like access controls and network segmentation, zero trust architecture. Those are all things that came up in the podcast. And a lot of those are actually a really, really good idea for your third-party integrations. Principle of least privilege is a term that I kept coming up with again and again as I was doing research for this part of the webinar. The idea being that, and this can even apply to software like Verve's software. We are a third-party vendor coming into your environment, and we do ask, in some cases, for access to devices where there are, say, credentials that we need to use to access information about a device. And it is a very, very good idea, and we encourage this in our engagements to, we know what level of access we need to a system, and we have a lot of that documented and we can share it. And we do encourage, where possible, to utilize whatever technologies, whether that's, domain infrastructure, TACAX radius for Cisco switches, or other configuration options where they exist, to make sure that, yes, we do have access to the information that we need to inventory your devices successfully, but then also only have that level of access and not one iota more, making sure that we don't have any access to your environment that we don't need to do the job that you've brought us in to do. And that's true for all your third parties as much as possible. You should really strive to manage the degree to which they can access your environment, making sure that, they can't go any farther than what you need them to do. And also monitor what those solutions are doing to make sure that you have a good understanding of how those solutions operate and can react quickly if all of a sudden one of those deployed solutions does something a little weird. We also talked a little bit about supply chains and SBOMs in the podcast, and that is another important part of third-party risk management as well. Working with your vendors, your suppliers, to understand where are they drawing their components from? What other software libraries is the software they're supplying you reliant on? Because, and again, we are a software company. We use certain software libraries in our product. This is true of basically every software product out there these days. SolarWinds, even Microsoft Windows. They bring in other components, not all developed in-house. And if one of those components further down the software development chain, suddenly a vulnerability is found in it, well, that's good to know about, but then it's also good to know, okay, well, is one of the affected versions bundled into a piece of software that I'm using in-house? And if so, how do we go about mitigating that? Disaster recovery readiness is, of course, another good mitigation strategy. This one is not new by any means. As a suggestion, making sure that you have good backups, reliable backups, offline backups, because ransomware loves to target backup servers. Making sure that those backups work. Regularly testing, and then also regularly reviewing all of these other elements, making sure that your monitoring is working, making sure that your backups work, making sure that you are going back and communicating with your vendors and even adjusting contractual requirements or readdressing them periodically, checking in with vendors to make sure that the information flow is there, to make sure that everybody is on the same page, asking questions of your vendors as new threats emerge. Hey, what is your plan for dealing with this new risk that has emerged on the horizon? And encouraging transparency in all of that, giving vendors a very clear means of contacting you when they need to, being able to reach out to them when they need to, and encouraging that flow of information back and forth. To sum it up, it seems very, very likely that there'll be a very critical need for companies to evaluate their third-party integrations and vendors based on the security practices that those integrators and vendors have. And once they bring those solutions in, to monitor, segment them out as much as possible, and then to encourage that transparency, the reporting and alerting on issues as they develop, or even before they develop. And that's all I had for that bit, so I am going to kick it on down.
Oh, I had to come off of mute there, Ken. Thank you very much. So one of the other topics we had out there in our podcast was fill into IT/OT void. So this is one of the bigger important items out there, as we see it from viewpoints of the field. So I like to talk about it from the field perspective of when I'm going to the plants, talking to the personnel and seeing, what are some of the challenges that you're going through. So a lot of the understanding that I get from OT folks is that IT folks don't understand the impact of field devices that they're interacting with, whether this is an HMI, a PLC, or maybe a redundant server out there. So it's trying to understand those components out there, because traditionally IT folks have always considered like an endpoint, whether it be a computer or a printer or something of that nature, being very low impact or just impactful to like an individual person or maybe a small group of people. So it's trying to expand the knowledge of that impact of those field devices to make sure that they have those knowledge of, hey, this does have some potential impact on the operation of the plant as a whole. If you were to take it down or need to do a reboot or something of that nature. So it's trying to build that communications path. Whereas on the OT side, the OT folks have a reduced IT skill sets on traditional IT concepts such as networking and system administration, and even sometimes into doing backups and things of that nature. Maybe they're not doing bare metal backups to their systems and all of the nuances that revolve around performing those types of backups and even trying to do restores from those. They're also very behind in times as far as doing anything more newer IT concepts such as virtualization, not only on your compute resources, but also on your storage and your networking front as well. So there's a lot of shared skill sets that can be shared across the board on those. And it's just trying to bridge that gap and actually having those conversations with each other to make sure that impacts are being brought across. And then also the intents from the IT group is also brought across as well. So a lot of times, the IT folks are not trying to be intentionally malicious out there, but, by lack of understanding of the impact of some of the systems, they don't know that, maybe just rebooting the switch, I'm just kind of causing an inconvenience, where I am more focused on being the entire operation to a grinding halt because of real-time telemetry that's being brought back from some of those connected systems that are out there. So bridging the IT/OT divide and empowering teams with limited resources. So building awareness on the impact of OT systems. So a lot of times we'll see OT folks are still utilizing like Excel or some type of a spreadsheet program to keep track of what their resources are for make, model, firmware, things of that nature in kind of a limited fashion. So that makes it very difficult to be able to convey impact, because as soon as you write something down in that spreadsheet, it becomes harder to be able to convey those types of impacts out there. So by trying to be a little bit more automated system where we can provide you some impacts on anything that the devices intrinsically know about themselves, then you can fill in those ancillary items that the devices don't intrinsically know about themselves within an automated system. So that's what Verve really delivers for you in that type of convention. So conveying traditional IT concepts in a meaningful way. So this is the same thing for being able to do network segmentation and backups. Are you backing up your OT systems? By and large out there, a lot of times we'll find that people they're trying to copy different files around for system configurations, things of that nature, but they're not doing like a structured backup solution out there to be able to make sure that they have maintainable copies of the components that they have out there. Or it may be on an individual engineering workstation that's a laptop that's transient that may or may not be being backed up to a operations engineering workstation for the consolidation of any type of changes or even change management for that matters as well. Can we go on the next slide? So basically bridging that IT/OT gap. So one of the things that Verve likes to take into account is the think global aspect and the act local determinations. So one of the things that we're able to do within our ecosystem is we'll collect all of this intrinsic data for all of these assets. And then we'll combine it with knowledge from the field from all of our OT personnel that may be just siloed just to the local subject matter experts that have all that information related to those devices. So we'll merge all that information, bring it together in a reporting mechanism to be able to think globally on the scale with all that other granular detailed information from the OT SMEs, and then also being able to analyze vulnerabilities and risks, any things that we could be doing for remediation as far as network segmentation, patching, if you guys are doing that out there, and trying to do it in a very, very controlled manner. Because one of the things you don't want to do is send down a patch to a server system, even though it's redundant in a way that's acting upon an entire plant. It has to be very prescriptive and validating that it's going to work against the application system and then tested out or validated against a application vendor before it can be sent down. So one of the things that we do within our ecosystem is if you guys do patching, then we can send it down as an offer to the local system for evaluation to get that going. Now, that's also with the idea that long before that, that the due diligence has taken place with the application vendor, the validate, the patches, and things of that nature to make sure that we're not doing any type of harm to the environment that's making money that may be a detriment to that overall system. So that's a part of our ecosystem that we utilize out there. So that's the think global, act local philosophy that we tried to convey to our folks. So next slide. And I'll turn that over.
All right. So as a team, when we had the podcast back in December, there's a couple other trends we wanted to cover. So we'll kind of tag team this one together. But the two technologies that are coming up, of course, are cloud adoption and OT ICS, and the impact of AI to software development of assets and products. So when we last talked about this in December, we were talking a little bit about the potential insecurities coming to the OT environment, introducing that new attack vector that might be coming in through this new cloud attack vector. Because typically in operations, majority we see, everything's on-prem, everything's local. We don't want things going outside of our ecosystem just because it introduces a lot of new risks. So in the start of this, I mentioned from a governance point of view, a lot of these things with cloud and AI adoption, they're fairly new to OT. Not too new to IT, but it's still being slow to get implemented within environments that we commonly see with Verve. Same thing as AI. So I don't know if Tyler or Zach or Ken, if you guys want to add some more color to this one as well.
Yeah, thank you for that, Natalie. So one of the things that we're seeing is, OT environments are very slow to adopt any type of new technology out there. So one of the aspects that we'll see within the cloud adoption is, offsite storage. So we are seeing some type of adoption out there to be able to get that offsite storage to be able to do telemetry out. Also seeing some new software-based, solutions out there that may be providing consolidated telemetry for multiple plants topics out there. So say you have a historian out there that's also trying to drive some business decision makers for aggregate data out there for your plants. So that's some of the other key scenarios that we'll see out there for cloud adoption is in those types of scenarios. So some type of a cloud solution or the adoption of a consolidated telemetry aspect to better help drive a different business unit within that same organization. So it just kind of depends on what the adoptions are out there as far as the need. But there are still a lot of implications around that based on what those items are and some of the mitigations that you have to take place and to be able to do those. So like energy sector is quite different as far as some of the things that you need to put in place. There's a lot of usage of data diodes for any of that telemetry data going out. AI is still very, very young in the OT environments. I think we're still waiting to see what the impact is that AI is going to be in OT environments, with some caution, some optimistic caution out there. So it's like any other type of technology out there where you're seeing it as a net new product, and you don't know if you're building a better hammer out there or not. So it's just trying to see what it is that this will be able to give me from an OT environment perspective. And it may be to the point of where it's adopting like both approaches. So like a cloud with an AI component, to where you're consolidating telemetry out there that's being analyzed by AI to look for any type of anomalous data that's out there. So there's some different particulars out there that could be a very good use case out there for those things, for telemetry, as well as what could be a potential out there as well. And what I've seen some very edge cases for is some additional anomalous behavior. So like rotating machinery for vibration analysis, things of that nature. If we're feeding a lot of that large data from rotating machinery to look for some of the aspects on that, maybe that's something that can help us out on those that provide us a little bit more of a learning aspects for long-term degression of that machinery based on bearing usage and replacements and things of that nature, give us a little bit more preventive maintenance on that side. So just a little bit of my perspective from those types of upcoming technologies that are out there.
Yeah, much the same thoughts here. It's still relatively novel to see technologies like Azure AD, Entra ID used to manage OT environments. I can only think of a very, very small handful of companies that I've seen which have any kind of control system infrastructure deployed in something like Azure. And AI, I mean, that's, as Tyler had said, I mean, in some industries, there is only data outflow and there's really no data inflow back from anything that is even internet facing to begin with. So I wonder if maybe it's going to be a while before we see AI have any meaningful presence inside an OT environment. Certainly on data coming out of those environments, and once it kind of crosses the boundary and it's in the IT side realm again, there could be all sorts of AI models that get run on that data. And can think of a handful of examples of companies, a lot of financial companies right now, but I'm sure there are others, training their own in-house LLMs to on their own internal data set. So they're getting, what they view as high reliability from the AI model that they're using. Apparently that has worked very, very well for like JP Morgan Chase and a handful of others, at least from the articles I've seen. But, I don't really see that becoming too much of a thing within the actual OT environments themselves. Whereas, yeah, we are starting to see a little bit of cloud adoption, but it's still relatively novel, not something that I've seen a lot of. Sometimes sometimes we're still struggling with, like I said in the podcast, much more basic things like managing user accounts from operators who retired a decade ago.
Exactly what Tyler and Ken and even Natalie have been saying. If it's not broke, don't fix it. And that's really seems to be a big, I don't want to say mentality, but it's within the OT ICS world. You're trying to provide, it's not like IT where there's a lot of data in store. Almost all of the data is being used for something, almost all of it. It's continuing to create a product real world. So we've, even with some of my customers, the primary thing that we've seen any sort of cloud-based adoption for has, like Tyler said, with backups or something of that nature that, it can be a significant helper if they do get hit from a ransomware attack, that they can use the cloud infrastructure to back up their on-site servers or services. So really that's the big thing that we see with cloud, and cloud really being implemented even in the IT world over the last 10, 15 years or so, maybe that's even stretching a little bit. OT is not really in a good site yet for AI. I've seen AI more appropriately machine learning in SIM capabilities and security alerts. Just like was mentioned, looking for anomalies, looking for things that might be a thorn that might be an issue for the larger company soon. So we've seen some AI with that. We've seen some in software development, but it's been very early on. Most of it is any sort of third-party software developer is potentially using some of the AI to create better platforms for OT. But really, this is something that we're seeing very, very, very minimal within the ICS world.
There's also the issue of cost, because training models, even to do something like Joaquim's remark there in the Q&A, validating PID controller settings by feeding process data into AI. Correct. That is absolutely a viable solution, and one that I could foresee controls vendors, and I don't want to, realize I work for a controls vendor, so I have to choose my words a little bit carefully here. In a hypothetical sense, I could totally see controls vendors working to incorporate that in some future iteration of the controls technologies that they are deploying to OT environments. But there is significant cost to training AI models, and that's something that we didn't really put into the slide here, but it is worth mentioning, especially in light of when we talked earlier about the troubles of water operators. And a lot of those troubles, as we said in the podcast, stem from the fact that this is an industry that tends to have fairly thin margins, not a lot of budget to begin with. And water isn't the only industry where that is true for their operational environments. So the odds that they're going to be training their own in-house OT models, even if they could stand up some infrastructure to run them, seems unlikely just because of the associated cost. But could I see it being incorporated over time into control system products? Yes, absolutely I could. And it would serve very, very well to do things like PID setting validation, loop tuning, and all of those things.
I would love to see it kind of as Larry's comment for vulnerability discovery, specifically if you're looking in terms of surface enumeration. And if it was as easy as putting an AI into an OT infrastructure and being able to see if there is any connections to the internet, or if there is connections to the IT world, or what they are, what limitations there are, some sort of machine learning capability with that, I could foresee, but I doubt it'll come something like this year.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks everyone for your input. We have just 2 more slides to get through, and then we'll be wrapping up this webinar, so just bear with us for a little longer. So now that we've covered a ton of upcoming trends for 2025, we just wanted to take the last few minutes just to kind of bridge the gap back to what our team does at Verve and at Rockwell, especially since on this call it might be your first time hearing from Verve. If this is your first time jumping on the webinar, or maybe you've listened to one of our podcasts, essentially what Verve is it's a cybersecurity platform that helps our customers in ICS and OT use this technology to gain a 360-degree view into your environment. What that really means is that Verve starts by creating your core asset inventorying using our this endpoint method, this technology we've developed to communicate to OT devices. And then, of course, you can't really protect something unless you know it's there. So once you build up that asset inventory, that's when Verve builds up all these capabilities. So this cybersecurity platform, it's really a program where we build up all these different tool sets to help you start your cybersecurity journey. And overall, Verve is a cybersecurity program that was built for OT environments by OT engineers. So at a high level, that's what the Verve technology is. And if we go to this next slide, I'll just briefly mention one other aspect of Verve. So Beyond just the technical platform of Verve, Verve also builds out cybersecurity roadmaps with our customers. So since it's a brand new year, perhaps your organization is considering 2025 as the year you start your cybersecurity journey. Of course, depending on the maturity of your organization, you might already find yourself somewhere along that path. So one of our most common tasks is determining your organization's maturity and then working with your team to essentially understand your environment, so we can essentially determine what steps we can take to make the biggest impact on your cybersecurity in your environment. For example, if you're at a level 1 maturity and you're building out your foundation, we can kind of work to assess your visibility into your environment and leverage the Verve technology, the Verve platform, to give you that automated and updated asset inventory, and then build up things like vulnerability management, patch management, etc. And then we can map your organizational goals back to the tools we have in the Verve platform, so you can balance your business objectives and values against the need to implement a cybersecurity strategy. So if any of this sounds interesting to you and you'd like to start a discussion or learn more about cybersecurity and especially about the Verve platform, feel free to reach out to any of us after this webinar, or we can schedule a demo as needed. And so with that, I will hand it back off to Ken to wrap us up. So thank you.
Absolutely. And so there are a few questions kind of just sitting outstanding in the Q&A. I just want to quickly run down them as best I can. I know we only have a couple of minutes left. Eric, that is an interesting question, asking about the rise of polymorphic attacks and attacks that are immune to EDRs, next-gen AV. That one is, I think, a little bit outside what what we're talking about in this one, but I'm going to suggest that we pull that one in as maybe a subject for a future webinar once we have a chance to do a little bit more research into it. It's not something that I'm really prepared to talk about off the cuff, but it is an interesting question, and I do think it's worth exploring in a little more detail.
Got a little bit of input on that one,
Sure,
Ken.
yeah.
So I was going to suggest the same thing, maybe included on a podcast or something of that nature, because that's one of the things that we talk about for, the difference between like antiviruses and having to do definition updates and things of that nature. So that's kind of the major difference between doing like a antivirus and then like application whitelisting. So like a lot of your OT environments are very static in nature. So a lot of times we have ventured towards just doing application whitelisting because of that static nature. And then that way you're very programmatically introducing any type of new programs that are out there because they get flagged as net new out there in the environment.
Absolutely. An anonymous commenter asks for thoughts on using a tool to provide adversary emulation to validate third-party risks on a continuous basis. I like the idea. The only thought that I really have is that is definitely a tread carefully when you're talking about an OT situation, just because of the inherent sensitivity of OT environments. Subjecting only your third-party stuff to that sort of spontaneous testing is probably not a bad idea, at least the software. If you're talking about hardware, definitely exercise a degree of caution, because a lot of times OT hardware, I think, as most of us probably know, doesn't respond well to malformed or unexpected traffic.
Yeah, don't expect to throw Metasploit on an OT network and have it do not bad things, right? It's not a good idea.
Thor asks another question. What should I do to evaluate my OT environment according to the roadmap shown? And I think that would be another excellent one for like a topic of just like, a walkthrough of, well, how do you go from greenfield to a full solution? Because the way you worded it, Thor, analyzing assets or evaluate network diagrams, something like that, the answer is yes, all of that and more beyond. Those are excellent places to start. If you have asset information of any kind, if you have network diagrams of any kind, those are excellent places to start. And then from there, you can springboard into other forms of in-house analysis And we can also use that information to inform a Verve deployment, help us find our way around your environment and find all the devices that are out there. Which brings me to this other anonymous question. Would you say Verve solution is a software platform, or is it more guiding companies through the discovery process and determining what they need to do to make their systems more robust? Both.
Both.
Yeah. The Verve, when we talk about the Verve Security Center, that is a software platform, right? It's different software components, the Verve reporting, asset management, ADI, BigFix, and sometimes some other tools as well, depending. Those are all pieces of software. But what they do is they pull in all of this asset information. They help you find what's in your environment. And with that information, then you can start to make those other determinations and start to develop strategies going forward. And we have other departments that can walk you through those parts of the process as well.
Yeah, the nice thing about Verve is it can be a completely customer managed solution. So that means that once Verve is deployed and it's in your environment, you can manage it yourself and, evaluate your assets, your vulnerabilities, and keep up with it. Or if you need help, you can, we can also provide that service. But as far as products go, it can be a completely customer managed product.
Mhm. And just to tack on with the last couple of questions from Keyhind and Larry, big fix capabilities. So like out of the box, we have like patch management for your operating systems and for a lot of third-party applications that are commonly installed on operating systems. We have vulnerability detection for all of the same. We have asset discovery using big fix enabled endpoints, both passive and a little bit more active discovery to help us find other devices and computers that are out on the network. And then we also have support for what are called superseded patches, which is kind of it addresses a quirk in how Microsoft sometimes reports KB numbers and CVEs, just to make sure that we're getting a truly accurate picture of the vulnerabilities that do exist in an environment where we have big fix deployed. And then looping back, yes, we do have a department or a small group within Verve that will work with you to improve things like network segmentation.
What you said as well, Ken. So accounts as well. So we utilize BigFix to look at different user accounts as far as group policies and what accounts might have outdated passwords or might not be within compliance for your organization's passwords. So say you need a 16-character requirement. You can see which users are not in with that. Also software elements as well. So we'll use the BigFix to pull in data as far as what software is currently on a customer or on a workstation.
Brilliant. Well, I think we probably need to stop there because Natalie's already had to drop and we have gone a few minutes over time. So I'll take note of some of the rest of these questions and I will actually attempt to follow up on them as I am able, or we will. And of course, our contact information is just there. Feel free to reach out to myself or anyone from the discussion group here if you do have questions. And yeah, Erica, did you want to say a couple of closing words for us as well?
I think I'm good, but thanks everyone for joining us. We will be sending out a webinar recap email following the session with the webinar recording and more information and resources for everyone to enjoy. So thanks everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you kindly, everybody.
Thank you everybody for joining us.
Take care.